Well, Nick, if they were going to make it realistic, they would have got someone like Daniel Craig to play me, if I'm honest. When Dominic Cummings was hired by Matt Elliott and Dan and myself, we had a bit of money and we hired him to start doing some focus groups on what people thought about Europe and attitudes to Europe and how you might begin to build a 50+1% coalition for leaving.
Film I thoroughly enjoy, I've watched it about 6 times now in the last 5 years, is Brexit, the Uncivil War. Now, it's not a documentary, it's a film. I give them some artistic license. I'm sure they've changed things to make it more entertaining. You're heavily portrayed in that film by an actor. How true is that film, or is it a load of rubbish? Is it pure entertainment? I want it from someone who actually knows.
Well, Nick, if they were going to make it realistic, they would have got someone like Daniel Craig to play me, if I'm honest. No, I think sadly they portray me as a slightly sort of goofy, lanky, balding chap. So I'm afraid it's all too realistic in that regard. But no, I mean, it's a bit right. For example, at the opening scene is me and Matt Elliott in the National Gallery, talking about not the National Gallery, Tate Britain, talking about what to do and how to force a referendum and all the rest of it. And that happened. We did used to meet there. It was a place in Westminster where you can guarantee that no whip is ever going to be in an art gallery. So we were able to plot in peace without arousing suspicions. But I think a number of failings. I think the single biggest failing is that it marginalizes the role of 2 individuals who were actually absolutely instrumental to Britain leaving the European Union. The first is Dan Hannan, a very good friend of mine. He and Matt Elliott, and to a much lesser extent, those 2 individuals founded Vote Leave. In fact, going back further, those 2 individuals are responsible for popularizing the idea that a referendum was the mechanism by which we needed to leave. In fact, Dan spotted this sort of 20 years ago, long before anyone else came along. He really understood that the mechanism to extract us from the European Union was to force a referendum. So, I mean, I think their role was slightly marginalized. It also rather exaggerates the role of Dominic Cummings. I mean, the person who wrote the script spent a lot of time with Dominic. And don't get me wrong, when Dominic Cummings was hired by Matt Elliott and Dan and myself, we had a bit of money and we hired him to start doing some focus groups on what people thought about Europe and attitudes to Europe and how you might begin to build a 50+1% coalition for leaving. Dominic played a key role, but he wasn't quite the architect of the change that perhaps he and others have suggested he was. I'll give you a specific example. The film portrays him as somehow mystically divining what the people of Jaywick in Essex wanted. And this was used to try to sort of capture this notion that we were tapping into the disaffected voters, the voters who no one spoke for, and magically mobilizing. Well, no disrespect to anyone, but actually it was in my constituency, Jaywick, and it was techniques that I and Dan and Matt perfected, and it was the Clacton by-election in August 2014 that secured a 75% majority of the votes in Jaywick. And it was the Clacton by-election where we started to begin to use the tools of creating email lists and lookalike groups on social media. So, I mean, I think also people are sort of quick to claim credit for tapping into the disaffected, what I think rather condescendingly subsequently were known as red wall or blue wall voters, the sort of disaffected working class voters. But I have to say, I think it was actually Clacton where we first mastered this art, and we did this sometime before those who claim authorship of all of this were on board. But it's a film, it's entertaining. I mean, it portrays me as drinking a bottle of champagne. Rather boringly, I'm teetotal. Perhaps if the people who wrote the script had spent a bit of time with me, they may have known that. But I think it over exaggerates the role of Dominic, who played an important role, but not the be all and the end all role. And it underestimates the key role of Dan and Matt. But I think actually history is rewriting that version of events, and increasingly people are beginning to understand that Matt Elliott and Dan Hannan and Daniel Hodgson and one or two others who've been in the shadows were actually pretty central to getting Britain out of the European Union. So yeah, it was a first draft of history, but it doesn't tell the full story.
Right. Thank you for that. I wasn't sure if it was purely made up. Obviously, it sounds like it was based on certain facts, but then a lot of artistic license to make it a 1.5 hour film.
Yeah. It was Dominic spending a lot of time talking to the scriptwriter. I think if the scriptwriter had talked to one or two others, they may have got a more holistic view of these things. But hey, it's flattering to have a movie made about something you did in politics. I mean, they say that most political careers end in failure. I quit Commons of my own choice, having accomplished Brexit, and got to feature in a movie, albeit not one in which I was portrayed by Daniel Craig.
Yeah. Well, we always can't have it our own way.